Ever heard of a company that promised to electrify the trucking industry and then rode the SPAC wave all the way to Wall Street, only to kind of crash and burn in spectacular fashion? Buckle up, because today we're doing a deep dive into the story of Romeo Power, a battery tech company that aimed for the stars, but ultimately landed with a thud.
What's really fascinating about Romeo Power is that their story, it really kind of encapsulates the frenzy and volatility of the whole EV market, especially, during that SPAC boom.
Right. We've got a stack of financial reports and some YouTube videos that give us a front row seat to this wild ride. So we'll be unpacking all the ambitious promises, the technological innovations, and the financial turmoil that ultimately led to Romeo Power's demise.
Yeah, to really understand Romeo Power's trajectory, I think we need to rewind back to around 2015. The EV market was gaining some serious momentum back then, but the focus was mainly on passenger cars. But Romeo Power, they saw an opportunity in the heavy-duty vehicle sector, so think trucks and buses, which presented some unique challenges. Just because of the sheer size and the power demands of these vehicles.
So they weren't just slapping together some off-the-shelf batteries and calling it a day. They were developing their own proprietary technology.
Exactly. They really focus on two key aspects: energy density and thermal management. Energy density basically refers to how much energy you can pack into a battery of a given size. Higher energy density means more range for the vehicle, obviously. And then thermal management. That's all about keeping the battery at an optimal temperature for both performance and safety, which is especially crucial for those, energy-hungry, heavy-duty vehicles.
Makes sense. You definitely don't want a battery overheating when you're hauling cargo across the country.
Yeah.
Romeo Power claimed that they were making breakthroughs in both areas, promising better range and faster charging than their competition. I even saw a video where their CEO was boasting about charging times as low as 15 minutes for these massive truck batteries.
Yeah, their claims were bold, and they definitely got a lot of attention. But this was also the era of SPACs, special purpose acquisition companies, which were becoming a very popular way for companies, especially in the EV space, to go public.
Okay, can you remind me, what exactly are SPACs again? They always sounded kind of shady to me.
Well, think of a SPAC as a shell company. That goes public. Yeah. With the sole purpose of merging with a private company and thereby taking that private company public without the traditional IPO process. So it's faster and less bureaucratic. But it also comes with a lot of risks, especially for investors who might not have all the information they need to make informed decisions.
Got it. So Romeo Power jumps on this SPAC bandwagon in late 2020, right in the middle of this EV craze. What happened next? Did they become like the next Tesla?
Not quite. Initially, there was a lot of hype. Their CEO was pretty charismatic. He was making all these grand claims about Romeo Power being the foundational technology of electrification. They were partnering with some big names like BorgWarner. And their stock price, it was soaring. But as we'll see, that excitement was pretty short-lived. Remember those really aggressive revenue projections we were talking about? I mean, Romeo Power was aiming for $40 to $50 million in 2022, and then a whopping $1.65 billion by 2025.
Yeah, those numbers were pretty eye-popping. But was that even realistic?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? To put it in perspective, those kinds of valuations were based on that 10x sales multiple. That was so common in the whole EV market back then. Investors were basically betting on exponential growth, often just completely overlooking the fact that Romeo Power was still a relatively young company with very limited production capacity.
So basically everyone was just caught up in the hype, hoping to strike gold with the next Tesla. But as they say, what goes up must come down. And boy, did Romeo Power come crashing down.
It was a dramatic fall from grace. You know that YouTube channel, Talkin' Investing? The host, Tom, actually raised some red flags pretty early on. He pointed out that Romeo Power was super reliant on raising additional capital just to keep the lights on.
Which is pretty normal for startups, right?
Yeah, for sure. But the problem was, their stock price was already plummeting. And a falling stock price not only does it make it harder to raise capital, but it also leads to something called dilution. Basically, the company might have to issue more shares to raise the same amount of money, which devalues the holdings of their current investors.
Ouch. That's got to sting for those early investors. Who bought in at the peak? Tom also mentioned those supply chain disruptions that were hitting the entire industry in 2022, right? Didn't that kind of throw a wrench in Romeo Power's plans?
Absolutely. You know how Romeo Power was touting? Its advanced battery management system and those super fast charging times. Well, all those promises relied on having a steady supply of components, a lot of which were in super high demand and short supply. I mean, you had the global chip shortage, the pandemic-induced logistical bottlenecks. It was like all these factors just created this perfect storm for Romeo Power.
It's like they were trying to build a rocket ship,
Yeah.
while also like trying to source parts from a garage sale. So we've got unrealistic projections, a plummeting stock price, and this supply chain crisis. What happens next in this Shakespearean tragedy?
By October 2022, Romeo Power stock had crashed to a measly 34 cents. A far cry from its peak of $26.42. The company was just hemorrhaging cash, desperately searching for a lifeline.
And that's where Nikola Corporation enters the picture, right? Another struggling EV company with like its own baggage of scandals and investigations.
Exactly. The acquisition of Romeo Power by Nikola in October 2022 was seen by a lot of people as more of like a consolidation move, some kind of triumphant takeover.
So less happily ever after, and more like two companies clinging to each other as they're sinking deeper into the stormy EV sea. But why would Nikola, a company already facing its own problems, want to acquire Romeo Power?
Well, Nikola was really trying to boost its battery technology capabilities.
Yeah.
And Romeo Power, despite all its struggles, still had some very valuable intellectual property and engineering talent. However, the acquisition didn't just magically solve all of Nikola's problems. They still continued to face production delays, regulatory scrutiny, and all these concerns about their long-term viability.
It's like a financial soap opera with a cliffhanger ending. What's happened since the acquisition? Has this merger of struggling EV companies turned into a success story? Sounds like the Romeo Power acquisition was more like a Band-Aid on a gaping wound for Nikola. Did they even manage to stop the bleeding, or are they both sinking together?
Well, the jury's still out on that one. I mean, Nikola's pushing forward with their electric truck plans, and they are integrating Romeo Power's technology into their vehicles. But,
Yeah.
they've definitely had a few bumps in the road, production delays, ongoing financial concerns, and let's not forget that whole saga with their founder.
Yeah, that whole situation with their founder definitely raised some questions about Nikola's credibility and leadership. So where does that leave us? Is the Romeo Power story just a cautionary tale of the perils of SPACs and all that hype around EVs? Or are there bigger lessons to be learned here?
I think it's honestly a bit of both. On the one hand, Romeo Power's rise and fall really illustrate the dangers of those overinflated valuations, the ambitious projections that just don't pan out, and the fickle nature of investor sentiment. That whole SPAC craze definitely played a role in inflating their stock price and setting all those unrealistic expectations.
It's like a financial version of the Emperor's New Clothes. Everyone's praising this revolutionary technology, but no one's really stopping to ask if it can even live up to the hype.
Exactly. But I think beyond the SPAC frenzy, Romeo Power's story also kind of highlights the inherent challenges of the EV industry as a whole. It's a very capital-intensive business. There's intense competition, these really complex supply chains, and then you've got that constantly evolving technological landscape.
So it's not enough to just have a cool idea or like a promising prototype. You need to have the resources, the operational expertise, and the ability to adapt super quickly to a rapidly changing market, and maybe even a little bit of luck.
Oh, absolutely. The EV industry is a marathon, not a sprint. And while there will definitely be winners and losers along the way, I think the long-term potential of electric vehicles is undeniable. We're seeing these major shifts in consumer demand, government regulations, and even the infrastructure to support electric transportation.
So the Romeo Power saga, it is a cautionary tale, but it's also a good reminder that we're still in the early innings of the whole EV revolution. There will definitely be more bumps along the way, but the transition to electric transportation.
What I think is really fascinating to consider is what this transition means for the future of the whole automotive industry. Will those traditional giants adapt and thrive? Or will we see like all these new players emerge as dominant forces? And then there's the role of technology. Will battery technology just keep evolving at this crazy pace? Or will other innovations, like hydrogen fuel cells maybe, play a bigger role?
So many questions, so much potential. I guess the only thing we can be sure of is that the EV landscape is going to continue to evolve in all these unpredictable and exciting ways.
One thing's for sure, though, the whole story of Romeo Power, it's a compelling reminder that even the most promising innovations can face some totally unforeseen challenges. It highlights the need for critical thinking, a healthy dose of skepticism, and a deep understanding of the forces that are shaping the future of transportation.
Well, there you have it, folks. A deep dive into the rise and fall of Romeo Power, a company that soared on ambition,
stumbled on reality and ultimately became a footnote in the grand saga of the EV revolution. It's a story that reminds us that while the road to electrification may be bumpy, the journey itself is bound to be electrifying.